Welcome to the Appalachian Wellness Connection. Join myself, Dr. Kevin Britt, and my good friend Dr. Micheal Bryan as we guide you through natural solutions for better health and lasting wellness. From chiropractic care to functional healing, we're connecting you to the best in holistic health from the heart of East Tennessee.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Appalachian Wellness Connection. In today's episode, we're going to talk about from toxin to tired, how mitochondria get hijacked and what we can do about it. So in the last episode, we talked a lot about how mitochondrial function is related to things like brain fog, chronic pain, brain disorders, like cognitive decline. We want to look at the question, is there something hijacking your mitochondria? And so the truth is, there's toxins that are all around us, pretty much everywhere that we look. And so from our food to our water, our homes, our daily routines, there are going to be hidden exposures that can sabotage those tiny engines in our cells that really power everything. And so in this episode, we're going to break down how toxins will damage the mitochondria, talk about some of the signs of burnout in the mitochondria, as well as give you practical tools for detoxification, recovery, and how to restore your energy to the levels that it should be. And so just to recap, the mitochondria are like the power plants, or they're like our engines. And so we have to have energy to be able to run processes. And so we break down our food, we combine that with oxygen, and we produce ATP. And so that ATP is like the molecule that we use to be able to run those processes. And so things like toxic overload or toxin overload can damage the engine, and that can cause big problems. One way we can think about this, if we go back to that engine analogy, we can think about maybe an undesired aspect gets in our gasoline, and that starts to clog up that engine, and that engine, instead of making 300 or 400 horsepower, we start to go to 200 to 100. We start having energy production issues even in our vehicles.
And so when we're talking about toxins, the first thing to do is let's talk about where they come from. And sadly, they are everywhere. So we just want to do an overview of some of the most common ones and some of the most overlooked sources that are going to create stress on our mitochondria. First one being pesticides and herbicides, right? Big one's glyphosate from Monsanto, and there's a whole lot of issues with those. But it's not the only one. There's lots of different companies trying to create the next big one to theoretically help increase food production. But really, when we found through the practice of regenerative agriculture and things like that, if we go back to the way God made things, we tend to get better, healthier food for us, and we don't need to mess around with things. But pesticides and herbicides are big ones. So if you can get organic foods, it's great to do that. Now, I'm not saying if you can't get organic, then just go have the French fries over the inorganic apple. But you still want to, if you can and can afford it, focus on organic foods. Next one would be heavy metals. And heavy metals are similar to pesticides and herbicides. They're everywhere. Things like mercury. A lot of people know about mercury in fish, but a big one is mercury in your fillings. So if you've ever had amalgam fillings in your teeth, and more importantly, if you've ever had them and got them removed but not removed properly, you more than likely have way too much mercury in you. Lead's a big one. A lot of people hear lead, they think old paint and old pipes, but actually there's a guy I follow now on Instagram, and he goes around and just gets new products like baby bottles, and he goes and he tests them for lead right there on the spot, and it's surprising. It's terrifying how many of them actually have lead. So lead's a big one. And then the other big one is aluminum. Aluminum is everywhere. A lot of people still cook with aluminum foil. Aluminum's in a lot of our pharmaceutical products, and we really want to watch aluminum. We're finding out that that's one of the biggest neurotoxins that our body is exposed to. Next, we have mold toxins. So toxins from mold, like especially water-damaged homes. Here in Northeast Tennessee and Western North Carolina, just last end of September, early October, we had the hurricane and the flooding that created havoc around here. And because of mold, it's probably going to wreak havoc around here for a lot longer than people think about. So if you've ever had a flooded basement or area of your house, that's definitely something that you want to check out. And then some of the more unknown things like household cleaning products. A lot of the chemicals that we get in our household cleaning products are loaded with stuff that is really, really bad for our mitochondria, and we want to watch that. Synthetic fragrances. This is a big one in personal care products for you ladies and even gentlemen with all your hair products and beard products for the guys, but especially for the women with makeup and things. I forget, last time I looked, it was, I think, 1,800 chemicals that are banned in Europe that are allowed in the United States in your personal care products. Air fresheners are a big one. People like their house to quote unquote smell fresh, but they're loaded with nasty synthetic fragrances. And the big one is candles. I remember I had a patient years and years ago whose husband was a air quality specialist, and she said one time the office someone was burning a candle, and she said, "Oh, that's the single worst thing that you could burn in your house or use in your house is a wax-based, petroleum-based, fragrant candle." They essentially, the fragrances and the wax gets aerosolized, and then now you're inhaling it into your lungs, and it's one of the worst things that we can do, and that really directly damages our mitochondria. Then we can get into things like plastics, right? Storing it in Tupperware and then heating it in microwaves and things like that, and then all of the packaged foods that come in plastics, and that's going to wreak a lot of havoc with the microplastics that a lot of people have heard about now. EMFs and blue light, we talked about that in the last podcast, but things from the blue light from our screens and our phones and our TVs, and it's everywhere now. Even the LED lights that are just so non-natural, they're wreaking havoc on our mitochondria. And then the EMFs from 5G cell phones, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all of those things. And then the other one I wanted to touch on, toxins, endotoxin. So endotoxin is a toxin that gets released from the cell walls of bacteria in our gut when those, typically of the bad bacteria in our gut, when people have things like gut dysbiosis or SIBO, or when those bacteria are getting killed by our own body's own immune system or the good bacteria in our body, and we have leaky gut, our body's going to absorb some of those endotoxins, and that's often, very, very often, one of the main triggers in a lot of our autoimmune conditions that we see. And so, it's a long list of areas where we get toxins, and there's quite a few steps to do, but all of those steps are pretty much taken care of when we talk about the basics of what we typically talk about. Some other areas that I think Dr. Mike already mentioned it, prescription medications is where we see a lot of these toxins that damage our mitochondria. Things like antibiotics, statins are a big one, antidepressants, anti-anxieties. So this stuff isn't just floating around. Like, once it gets into our body, it can get stored into tissue, especially fat, because our immune system is very intelligent, and it's going to try to sequester all of these things into mainly fat tissue to get it out of our bloodstream and out of our important tissues. But it gets to a point where our body is just overloaded, and so our mitochondria start to dysfunction. And so there's a lot of stuff we can get into with all this of how to fix it, how to correct it. And I think we're going to go over that next, but just those are the big areas of where you need to start to look around your environment and see, how can I improve this? How can I make things better to take away the damage on our mitochondria to allow our body to really start to heal that? And that's the beginning phase of this.
Yes. So let's look at how toxins are going to damage the mitochondria. So first of all, toxins create more oxidative stress. This is going to overwhelm our antioxidant defense system. So an oxidative stress is when oxidative stress occurs with every single metabolic process. And so there are these aspects of metabolism that are somewhat undesirable, and so we have this antioxidant defense system that's going to help curb that and make that less damaging to the body. And so if we're creating more oxidative stress, that's causing more and more damage, and that's really overwhelming that defense system naturally. Next, it will destroy and affect the mitochondrial membrane. So interesting is the work of Bruce Lipton. He's a famous scientist. He got a human cell and started removing different organelles to see how it would affect the cell's ability to stay alive. And so he removed different parts. And one of the interesting things is when they removed the cell membrane, that's when the cell died. And so the cell membrane is like the gatekeepers, or it's what basically allows things in and out of the cell or in and out of different chambers within an organelle. And so if you're damaging that membrane, you're allowing the wrong thing in the wrong place, which is going to lead to a disruption in that energy production. Next, it's going to damage the electron transport chain. That's where ATP is ultimately made. And so if we don't get that ATP, we don't get that energy production, we can't run vital processes. Next, we look at DNA replication. And so our body, DNA is like instructions, and those instructions are for how to run processes, how to make proteins. And so you can think about this as just basic processes. So if you think about the first thing you do when you get in your car, you crank it up and then you put it in, from park into drive. So there's a process to be able to drive that vehicle. There's a process to run that cell. So when the DNA is disrupted, you start doing things out of order, and that leads to issues down the road. Some of those issues could manifest as fatigue, even when you're rested, brain fog, hormonal imbalance, weakening in the immune function or overactive immune function, inflammatory modulation issues, which can mean you're under-inflamed or you're over-inflamed. I know how silly that sounds to say under-inflamed, but if there's not inflammation in the body when you have an injury, your body will never heal from that injury. It'll also slow down or speed up the metabolism, meaning that you're not metabolized, you're not having the right energy at the right time. In the past episode, we talked about how there's times, in a vehicle that you want full power. Well, there's also times that you want to conserve power, so you may decrease, go from 8 cylinders working in your car down to 4 cylinders to really slow that down. So when you get that metabolism out of order, that can cause issues down the road as well. Just think about energy as being your engine, and when you get the wrong thing in the wrong place, that jams up your engine, and that causes it not to be able to function and get desired outcomes.
Yeah, and when we start to talk to patients about this stuff, a lot of them, will express, all these toxins and where they can all come from. A lot of people will say, I don't quote unquote feel toxic. I don't feel like I'm inundated with all this kind of stress, but that's not how the body works, right? Your body's trying to compensate for all these things. So usually the signs are a little bit more subtle at first. For a lot of people, if you hit that wall after lunch, that midday crash, that's a sign that your mitochondria aren't functioning the way they're supposed to. And one of the main reasons is usually from some sort of toxic buildup. Some people, they say coffee doesn't affect them the same way as it used to. It used to give them that boost, gets them going in the morning. And now they almost get less of the boost and more of the crash. That's a good sign that you have some buildup of these toxins. A lot of people, if you do a workout, normally if you do a good workout, you feel energized afterwards, unless you're trying to completely gas yourself. But if you do a normal workout, like a strength building workout or something like that, and you feel exhausted instead of energized, that's a good sign. If you can't handle stress like you used to, a lot of people say, I used to be real laid back, but now I'm real short with my kids or my spouse. I don't respond the way I used to. That's a sign that your body doesn't have the energy it needs to respond to stress. And we have to start working on those things. And one of the more obvious ones that people tend to really notice is you feel puffy, you feel inflamed, you feel more foggy, brain foggy throughout the day than you used to. That's one of the more common things we're hearing nowadays. That's because these toxins are building up more and more in people. And so when your mitochondria is struggling, your body, pulls back energy from everything else, including things like healing and digestion and mental clarity, just to survive, because it's going to shuttle as much energy as it can to the survival mechanisms of your body via the brain and central nervous system, and take it away from some of those other aspects. So we need to listen to our bodies, and support it. But so those are some of the really obvious ways, or more subtle ways, that people notice that mitochondrial dysfunction from toxin buildup.
Yeah, so let's look at how do we support our detox pathways and help restore cellular power. So, reducing your exposure is the first and most important step. So, here's the thing. If you get one thing out of this entire podcast, it's this part right here. Reduction first. Reduce your exposure. It doesn't matter how many supplements you take. It doesn't matter about anything else. If you're constantly exposing yourself, there's no amount of supplements in the world that's going to get you out of this mess. The first thing that you have to do is you have to stop getting exposed first. Now, don't get overwhelmed. It's impossible to fully reduce. It's impossible to fully get away from all of these toxins, because we talked about earlier, they're everywhere. So I want to give you a couple practical places to look and start making these changes today, and you'll see fruit later on in your life. We talked about skincare products. There's thousands of chemicals that are allowed in American products that are not allowed in other countries. And so we have to realize that there's so much exposure with things that we're putting on our skin. Deodorants, shampoos, makeups, all of these things. You really have to be careful what you're putting on your skin, because your skin is your largest organ. It's huge, and so it's very absorbent. So whatever you are exposed to or put on your skin directly, it's going to make its way into the bloodstream. Then your body's going to have to process that out. Okay, so focus on those skincare products. That's number one. Number two, eat organic as much as you can. Now, we realize that there's people out there that can't fully eat organic. Maybe there's a lot of reasons for that. It may be that you just can't get it. It may be that you can't afford it, but there's practical things that you can do. One of the simplest things that you can do is Google Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen is a report that they put out every single year that shows the most saturated fruits and vegetables that have more pesticides, herbicides than other ones. And here's a good practical tip with this. If you eat the outside of, say, the fruit, it's going to have the chemical on there. If you're eating the inside of the fruit, like a banana, those are generally safer, because if the herbicide and pesticide is sprayed and it gets on the fruit, on the banana, you peel the skin of the banana and you eat the inside, so it's naturally protected there. So that's a good way to kind of think about, okay, what are safer options? Am I eating the outside of it? Am I eating the inside of it? The inside's always going to have less exposure to it. But do me a favor, Google that Dirty Dozen. If you can't afford to eat fully organic, you got to make sure that you're eating organic if it's on that Dirty Dozen. Now, on the flip side, there is what they call maybe like a Clean Dozen or Clean 15.
Clean 7, Clean 15.
Yeah, it's something like that. So it's the opposite. So the Clean 13 or Clean 15 or whatever, it'll be in that same report a lot of times. That will show you the cleanest fruits and vegetables that you can kind of, if you can't do organic the whole time, do organic with the Dirty Dozen, and do traditional non-organic for those Clean 15 or whatever that is in that report. The next one's going to be filtering your drinking water, and if you can, your shower. Now, not everybody can do this, but one of the things that we did years ago is that we got a whole home filtration system. There's a little bit of cost up front, about for the system we chose, it's about $1,000 up front. But when you do the math, that system's designed to last about 10 years for us, which is how much water we use. And when you do the math, $1,000 over 10 years, $100 a year, that's going to be pretty affordable over the big picture, looking at $10 a month, so to speak. is super affordable. You're actually going to spend less in the long run by just doing your whole house and trying to use those Brita filters and little things like that. So that's a big consideration because showers are oftentimes over missed. Skin's the largest organ. We're taking that shower. There's all kind of chemicals in that water. You can get on, I think it's the EPA's website, and you can actually look up your jurisdiction and where your water comes from, and they'll give you a report and show you what chemicals are in your water and what parts per million or what concentrations. And that will really help you with your filtration strategy because some chemicals require different filtration strategies. So go to that website and kind of look that up, and that'll give you a good idea of a good strategy as far as filtration and things like that. Some of the best options are going to be reverse osmosis and distillation. That's going to get pretty much any chemical out of there. So that's kind of like your go-to when you can go with both of those options. We talked about the synthetic fragrances. This is one that we don't always think about. Things like Glade plug-ins, things like those scented things that go in our car that hang on our mirrors. All of those things are airborne. So we're just breathing in those synthetics, and those are not natural, and those are going to cause issue and harm as well. Switch from plastics to more glass and stainless steel. Those are much better options when you're storing your food or even what you're eating out of. Something as simple as using a metal fork instead of a plastic fork, because every time that fork is grabbing hold of that food and you're raking that across your teeth, you're pulling in some of that microplastics. There was a report that was out a while back, and they said that the average person, I believe it was daily, it might have been weekly on this, was consuming a credit card's worth of plastic. I believe it was each week is what the average person was consuming in microplastic. So look for little ways that you could ditch the plastic and consume more glass and stainless steel. And here's a pro tip for you. When you're consuming, coffee out of those paper cups, water and paper doesn't go together, right? And so the inside of that paper cup does have, plastic sprayed in there so that, coffee doesn't leak out. So there's kind of a pro tip. You may want to take your own glass or ceramic mug to Starbucks whenever you go. Also look at maybe filtering the air is another big one. Especially if you're living somewhere around factories, or you're living close to the interstate where there's a lot of byproducts from the vehicles or the tires. As you're driving, the rubber in your tires breaking down, and that gets airborne. And so if you're living close to something like that, or an airport where there's a lot of fumes and things like that, you may want to consider how are you filtering your air. When we look at the body, our body has detox pathways that we can look at supporting as well. And so if you look at things like our liver, kidneys, lymphatics, our skin, and our gut, these are all places that we should really look at supporting. And so I'll give you a couple of strategies here in a minute to really work on detoxifying through these strategies. We talked about in the last episode using Cellcore products in that stage 1 we really love. One of the cool things in that step 1 of Cellcore is supportive nutrients for the liver, kidneys, skin, lymphatics, all of those things to really help speed up as well as make sure and ensure that you're detoxing the way that you need to. So here's a couple, just little tips that you can do. Stay hydrated. When you drink plenty of water in, you can mobilize and move those toxins, and you can get that through, our urine, and when we're going to the bathroom, we can eliminate those toxins. If you're dehydrated, it's harder to move those water-soluble molecules out of the body. This is more of an advance. We'll talk about this a little bit later in more detail. Taking binders. This is not something that you're really going to start with. This is something that you're going to do down the road. We want to focus on getting the basics established first, and we want to work on making sure that we're getting appropriate energy into the body before we start binding and trying to pull out those toxins. If you bind those toxins and try to pull them out, but you don't have the energy to run those detox pathways, you're constantly re-exposing yourself. So you got to get the basics first before you just go in there and take these binders. We had a patient in here literally last week that was taking some binders, having some issues. She wasn't, she wasn't going through, with us. She was kind of doing this on her own, which we were going to encourage you, if you can, if you're taking binders and things like that, it's always best to work with a professional. But she was kind of doing this on her own, and was having all these crazy symptoms. And, one of the things we were talking about is, man, you're taking the binders you're taking too fast. You're pulling things out and trying to mobilize toxins at a much faster rate than your body can get rid of it. And that's a huge problem because you're re-exposing. We changed that little strategy, and within 1 week, her symptoms were the majority of them were doing better, and she was doing really well. So it's really important to work with a professional if you're going to, do strategies like binders and things like that. The next one's going to be moving your lymphatics. Things like walking, rebounding, which is like jumping on a trampoline and going up and down, dry brushing. Moving the lymphatics is essential because our lymphatics, we have to contract the muscles to be able to circulate and move that lymphatics. They don't contract and move on their own. You see this a lot with people that are really stationary and don't move around a lot. You got to get those lymphatics moving. It's a huge, huge part. The next one, the last one, really important, making sure you're going number 2 every single day. If you're not going to the bathroom as much as you need to, there's no way you're mobilizing and getting rid of those toxins the way that you need to. So this is a really important strategy. This is one of those basic ones. We focus on mobilizing those bowels first, because if you don't get those bowels moving, you're really going to have a hard time mobilizing those toxins. If we look at, I'm going to quickly go through this. I know I've been talking a lot. Mitochondrial support supplements, some things that we can look at. Glutathione. So glutathione's nickname is the master detoxifier, or the master antioxidant of the body. We talked about in the last episode, reduction and oxidation. Basically, what that is there's byproducts produced from metabolism that are undesirable, and your body's got to be able to process that. Your body utilizes glutathione to manage that oxidative stress. So if you're not getting enough of that, that's something that maybe a professional would look at, with you and things like that. N-acetylcysteine. This is a precursor to glutathione. So cysteine is a sulfur-containing amino acid, and so it's a precursor to glutathione, so it works very, very similar, a little bit different. And N-acetylcysteine, just kind of a fun fact, is used in the hospitals pretty much every day. When people have like overdoses, especially like commonly prescribed medications, they'll use N-acetylcysteine in that as well. Alpha lipoic acid, again, another important fatty acid that's going to be used in those pathways and mobilizing heavy metals. It's an essential, so you got to make sure that you're getting ALA in appropriate amounts, especially people with neuropathy. That's one of the big antioxidants that really work well with people with neuropathy, is that ALA. Dr. Kevin talked about CoQ10, ubiquinol, all kind of the same thing. They're really good with our membranes, so making sure that those gatekeepers are allowing good stuff to stay in and the bad stuff to stay out is a good way to think about that. Magnesium. Magnesium's used in hundreds of chemical reactions. If those chemical reactions don't occur, ATP production doesn't get made the way that it needs to. You've got to have those enzymes to run the show. Acetyl L-carnitine, again, not going to get into this one just a ton, but really good for fat metabolism and removing byproducts there. And again, binders. This one, it's always best to work with a professional practitioner for guidance, because there is a balance with binders. You can't just go in there and take a gazillion binders. You're going to make yourself sicker than you ever was. It's a very finely tuned and very finely tracked process using those binders. So take this information, and this is going to really help you understand what it looks like to detoxify appropriately.
And so when we're talking about all these toxins and all this damage that it can cause, the ultimate message is that healing is possible. Your body is inherently, innately intelligent, and it is always trying to heal. As long as there's a breath of life left in you, your body is trying to heal. It just needs the right conditions. It needs the right help. It needs the right support. So by reducing toxin exposure and giving your mitochondria what they need, that's how we can ultimately regain your energy, improve mental clarity, reduce chronic inflammation, and really the goal is to build a resilient and healthier future. So if this episode sparked anything in you, maybe a new perspective or a better understanding of your own health, we'd love for you to share this episode with a friend or a family member who could use a little extra energy or a little extra encouragement. And if you're local and curious about how we support mitochondrial health and whole body wellness, here at Integral Wellness Company, we'd love to get to meet you and get to know you. You can find us online at integraltn.com or on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, or you can just stop by the clinic. We'd be happy to chat with you and see how we could help you be better from the inside out. So please be sure to subscribe to the Appalachian Wellness Connection so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. We've got some great conversations coming ahead that you won't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay well and God bless.